Okay, you can keep your microphone on mute during presentations. Always nice to see you on camera. If there's someone speaking and you want to be the next, you can raise your hand, or you can just open your microphone and speak. Use chat for doubts, questions, and comments. We have this registration when the meeting ends. We are using Google Drive to centralize some of our sources from the discussions. Mailing, we are using Jamboard during the online meetings. So I'm going to provide the links here in a bit. We also have a report. I haven't reviewed the previous report yet. I just copy pasted our comments from the Jamboards, and I will review during the weekend, and they're going to be open. Okay, so if you guys want to take a look, and they're dynamic documents, and I'll put a summary in the meeting. So today we're going, as I said, we're going to talk about data management. We have the same round of planning. So we have a short talk today. I recorded mine because we always have to prepare for things that might not work out. I have good internet here, but it was raining a lot, and we may drop. So and then we can discuss around 3 main questions or issues. So one, more general, how can we sustain these long terms in terms of data management? So which are the tools that help us? What challenges do we find when managing our data? And when I say about managing, I am including all the data cycle. Okay, so you can think about maybe the area that you are more responsible, or if you are a full data manager, you can be able to provide more input. And also how can and then the end, how those long-term sites or initiatives can improve data access and sharing. Okay, sure, it can improve management, but we see that sharing is a big challenge for many of them, at least to start sharing. So I would like to maybe go over that. At the end, if you want, you can showcase experiences and projects. So let me know in the chat, and we will leave some minutes for you. You can talk while, share your experience while the meeting, but if you want to present something, if you have slides from other presentations, you can just step up, and then we're going to close. Okay, let me switch the screen here. Christian, thanks Ming for letting me know. Christian, yeah. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, I was a bit late. Yeah, my name is Christian Muñoz. I work as a senior engineer in the Institute of Marine Research, in particular, more focused now on data management issues, and I am 100% employed now for the EF Nansen program, which is a global capacity development and fisheries research and management program coordinated together with FAO. And in my free time, I am part of the OBPS steering group as well. Thank you. I'm just here. My biodiversity is not my main area of expertise, but of course, yeah, it's good for me to be here today to learn a bit more on this and how better synergies can be established in OBPS and to learn a bit more on, yeah, on biodiversity and data management. So nice to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian, for being here. I think this discussion, marine biodiversity is learning a lot from the other areas of the ocean that has more data developed. So we're always glad to have our folks around and having more diverse discussions. So for those who doesn't know me, I'm Carol Mazuco. I'm from Brazil. I work in the eastern, currently I work in the eastern coast here. My background is in coastal oceanography. So I focus my research on biodiversity, several different parts. And in the last 5 years, I have been coordinating the monitoring and the planning of one of the LTER sites. We monitor and we observe several different habitats. That's how I got into data management and OBPS. I am a data person. I really like working with data, statistics, and all the data flow. So I joined this role. I'm not so experienced in this part, have been learning a lot with my folks in OBIS, and I'm always glad for improvements. So I'm going to play the recording, my recording. It's me, myself. I would like to reinforce that I try to be very simple, because I know the ones that watch those presentations later usually are people that have no experience at all. And then we can go into the discussions later. Okay, so let me see if I can find. I'm on the notebook, trying to figure out the windows here. Hello, everyone. Today I would like to share with you the challenges we faced when planning and implementing a long-term coastal observatory, and how OBIS has helped us along the way, not just in terms of data management, but also in a broad perspective of ocean practices. I would like to start by telling a little bit about our story. So we are a coastal observatory, which is part of the Brazilian long-term ecological research program called PELD, together with about 11 other along the Southwest Atlantic. I never remember how many we are in total. We are a multidisciplinary group in terms of our LTER site, and we are interested in assessing the impacts of climate change on marine life, environmental quality, and people's well-being. The site has officially integrated the network in 2016, but the monitoring had started some years before. Our monitoring sites are located on the eastern coast of Brazil, a transitional zone between subtropical and upwelling seascapes and a tropical site. The sites are part of a large marine protected area, which is called Costa das Algas, where we find the highest diversity of marine seaweeds in the South Atlantic and rich rhodolith beds and coastal reefs. It's also a region with large mangrove areas and estuaries. Several of them are highly urbanized, but they provide many services to local communities. In summary, we have hosted about 10 years of mangrove and estuary data, cover an integrated set of ecological and biogeochemical indicators to disentangle climate change's impact on ecosystem dynamics and production. We also have 5 years of benthic pelagic data covering multiple essential biodiversity variables and seascape parameters to access and predict warming effects on marine communities. And we also have 5 years of fish and invertebrate data to build an ecological baseline for sustainable development in scenarios of global change. We are a very small team, and although highly productive and enthusiastic, we truly know that our accomplishments rely on adopting best practices, especially in terms of data acquisition, in our case, very efficient sampling protocols and simple tool, and data management, which surely is still far from ideal, but we have a clear vision of what we want to achieve and have looked for it through those pathways. So that's when OBIS enters our stories. So OBIS is the Ocean Biodiversity Information System. I'm going to say OBIS throughout the presentation. And part of this process was also driven by the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, MBON, particularly the Pole-to-Pole of the Americas project, which have helped us to understand and join this OBIS community. We also look it up in many learnings from regional networks, especially for our mangroves and estuary teams, mainly from Rebentos, which is a Brazilian network of benthic ecologists who have done an amazing job to publish field protocols for monitoring benthic communities. And they're all in Portuguese, so they're easy to understand. And they have been implemented, for instance, by consulting companies too. And we have to mention the Blue Carbon International Community, from which we mirror many of our sampling practices and monitoring the forests, the mangrove forests. But let's talk about data now. So we were invited to reactivate the OBIS Brazil node at the end of 2019. And since then, we have been learning and collaborating with this awesome community. OBIS is the major data information system regarding marine life. It has more than 20 years of existence, and it was built by many hands and generations of ocean and data scientists. OBIS goes beyond its huge species and taxa occurrence repository. It actively engages in the development of standards, vocabularies, facilitates the access and exchange of information, assess and supports various marine line observing initiatives, and dedicates a lot of effort to capacity building. And it is sure an open and warm environment for collaboration. I know I can't hold myself advocating about OBIS, but I'm not here to focus just on OBIS as a system. I'm indeed to share some of the lessons that could also be learned in other communities that have similar standards and similar practices. I'm using OBIS as an example, but they have been fundamental to allow us to sustain the long-term marine observatory with a low amount of resources. So I chose 5 lessons. The first lesson is go with the flow. So just to be clear, it's important to mirror the best practices in terms of marine data that are available out there. And there's the repository that has major trust. It's worth doing it, knowing that the data that we generate by this small group and with not a lot of money can be used by others and easily accessed throughout the world. And it's integrated with data from other sites too. Our second lesson is choose high data standards. They may not seem very friendly in the beginning, since there is a long learning curve about procedures of data curation and quality control. We are always learning in this process, but as I said just before, it aggregates value and it will make your life easier in the end. So after we started implementing Darwin Core and OBIS quality control, it has been very easier for us to process our data. So with all this volume of environmental and marine biodiversity data, that we generate in those sites, when they are standardized, we can just build on those routines and automate the analysis. And third, just to start. So you may not be able to adopt the ideal data management actions and data flows at the beginning of the project. But once you start, you can sure step-by-step aggregate improvements whenever there is a space and resource for that. It's not easy. Sometimes we think we're not going to be able to keep up with everything that we are supposed to do. It's very high standards, but once we start, we can go slowly or step by step, adding new procedures and new processes. And in the end, I'm sure we're going to be able to achieve the standards that we want in terms of data. And the fourth lesson is prefer a language in a system that is interoperable or has a higher chance to become like that. So by using tool data publication tools, we could integrate, for instance, our data sets into the Brazilian National Biodiversity System, which is built on the top of GBIF, like OBPS, and also uses ALA as a visualization tool. As well as the Global Ocean Observing System Bioeco Portal, in the sense that this data that we provided will become an essential information about the ocean for decision making. So it will have the EBV formats and use that framework. And we are very glad that we are seeing that so quickly. And the fifth lesson, don't be afraid to ask and make mistakes. So this picture is me bothering Peter in one of our chats, that I always have a bunch of questions, but I know that OBs can help me, and there's always someone that has the same problem as I did before, or we can build together. So as long as a long-term research project, those digital information systems are very dynamic, including OBs, and we are going to always have doubts and need to question and need to learn new things, because they are preparing for the future, and they are dynamic as society it is. They are always looking for improvements and to solve the user's demands. So those questions, they actually help the system to be better, to become better. Incorporate, one suggestion that we give is that you incorporate the learning processes into your data routine and share with your peers both the successful actions and also the things that might not have come out as we planned. So errors, things that doesn't work out, they are important that we share. We still don't know and don't agree how we can share that, but for sure talking and suggesting things that have worked out are always useful. And I cannot forget to say that by starting to have a plan for data management, it allowed us to renew our 4-year grants and add other resources and partners, among many other positive things from for the observatory. So we saw all as positive. We know that we have spending some time on learning and resources and capacity building and training, but the positive impacts, they overcome any difficulty that we have. Another last message that I would like to share is that you don't need to become an OBS node to integrate the marine biodiversity data community, and even less to share your data. Maybe you are not on the stage of sharing the data. You work in a different area or sector in the project. But think that if you participate in any part of the data flow from the ocean to the end user, you are already a part of this whole process. And even if you don't own your, for example, there are some projects that they have their own data system. And even though it's fundamental to participate and share those best practices, with other systems, and make sure that you surf together with us in this ocean of data. All the systems available out there, they have positive sides and they have challenges to overcome. So we think that together is a better way to go. Sorry about the sounds here clicking all around. So I'm happy to hear your thoughts about that, especially in how we can integrate the different systems and how we can collaborate for better practices. I will share later some content and papers that OBs and other folks have gathered, especially on information about best practices. There's a lot of documents that describe those good examples. I would like to thank the OBS community for all the learning and warm welcome that I had. Thank the partners and the funders from our LTER site. And that's it. Obrigada. Thanks, everyone. So as we move forward, I would like to know if you would if you have any comments or question within the presentation, and then we can move over to the Jamboard. Does anyone want to make any comments? Just step in or ask question or raise your hand. Hey, Christian.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I think that there was one thing that really caught my attention in your presentation that I think it's very, very relevant for sure, which is this phases for implementing an entire data management program in an organization when there's probably nothing around. And we are dealing these days with these kind of issues to helping some of our partners in our program to create practically something from almost nothing, or even having to realign practices that have been for a long time done in other ways. And this is really a challenge because not everybody has the same capacity to incorporate certain layers of complexity in their programs or systems, and that's something that needs to be gradual. And I think I would, as a user, I would be really, really interested in seeing probably recommendations or best practices on what are the core things to start building step by step in a data management program, for example. I think it can be applicable not only to biodiversity data, but yeah, it's just that comment that I share your thoughts, and I think it's very relevant and very complex to go step by step or layer by layer on that process. That's all, just a reflection. Thank you.
Christian, thanks for sharing that. And I'm just going to comment and then open to others that might also have comments on that. So we were in OBS last week, and one of the things that we discussed is about this framework, because many of us, and as you said, you two are supporting other systems that have started implementing data management. It has been a requirement, and it's new for everyone. It's not just for the most experienced, even the most experienced research centers. Several of them didn't have a plan or a strategy, and now they have to deal with that. Luckily, they have to deal with that, and they have time in different spaces. So we were planning as one of our contributions for the next years to put up a framework in terms of OBS and marine biodiversity related to what we do. But there are also other tools. I've seen some in some of the systems, recommendations and basic things. Like I remember from there is the biodiversity. So the EBVs, the GeoBond has put a framework to help. I haven't really got into that very deeply, but they have a box or a system where it can maybe help you plan implementing in terms of biodiversity data. I am sure it's going to apply to others. But I also think that we may, if we want, think about that as a group. So there are other movements and all the events. And I've seen this, people talk about that everywhere. So maybe us as a community, we can maybe do a joint effort. I know it's very hard to recommend things because someone can just come and say, oh, what you are saying, it's wrong. But if we rely on a bigger community and review those documents and say, okay, this is the least amount of things that, or at least the ones that you should do that are going to help you, it depends, whatever. And so I think we should keep that in mind and maybe articulate in the future. I can contact you guys as I see the movement, if you are willing to contribute or join other people. But in terms of OBs, for sure, this is going to happen. We would like that as soon as possible, because it's not even clear in our website. So if you look on the recommendations and manuals, and they are being reviewed to be more clear, but it's still like a box or things that you can circulate, and it's not, because it really depends on a lot of variables. But I'm sure we're going to have a common sense. I think there's someone there is someone new. I can see here. No, okay, you wanna say that. Does anyone want to comment? Or Christian, if you want to say anything, just step in, guys. I'm just reading the chat here.
If nobody says anything, I'll just step in again on that comment. I think that yeah, working on that as a group could be very, very nice, because it is true that there is a lot of, you can find around a lot of things on how to implement data management systems all around, but probably when it focuses straight on under-resourced conditions, I'm not sure how much you can find really with that when you're dealing with situations where you don't have even a central server where to have backups, or where the practices are. I mean, I think it's completely another dimension. But I see Jens that has the hand up, so I'll shut up by now. But I agree with you, Carol. It can be very good to think that as a group.
Thanks, Christians. That's why they pushed this session so much, because so OBPS, we had all these like meetings going around, and then they pushed that we try to focus on under-resourced conditions, because it might be also the future situation. We don't know how the countries are going to deal with that and how much resource we're going to have for science in the future. So it's important that we prepare ourselves. Jens, please.
Yeah, nothing that's been said is anything that I disagree with at all. So I think we're probably going to just violently agree. But I think there's one thing that's really important as well, and it is independent of resource in a way. It's about like the culture of managing your data and the sort of sense of ownership and involvement. Obviously, we want to contribute into those global collections, but I think it's very important for anybody that's involved, like in the whole life cycle of the local data, to feel that sense of involvement and understand why that's being done and what benefits it might bring to them as well. Because otherwise, it very often ends up that the data management looks like there's a lot of complicated requirements because we have to send it somewhere else, and it's being imposed on us because we understand our data perfectly. So there's something about, like, as data managers, there's that technical aspect, of course, of making sure we have something that will implement and store the data and protect it. But there's actually also something, there's a lot actually about talking to people about why we were doing it and how it helps. That's, I think, really important early on in the process, because you need to get people sort of on board to trust that whatever it is that you're doing quite early on in it, because otherwise you're always going to find that it might only be some people that are engaged in the process or have buy-in. And sometimes that can be okay if you need to start with an early pilot and just want the people who are really enthusiastic. But it is very important at some point, I think, to make sure that you have a wide buy-in, whether it's in a small team or a big organization. It's pretty much the same. It might be different challenges depending on the number of people that are involved. But yeah, that trust side of things and benefits, like there's some kind of clear benefit for people on the local side of things as well, I think is quite important. I think generally it's very easy to add requirements to things, like you need to document this, you need to transform into this format, you're not allowed to do it this way because, and whatever, you just add, and there's the health and safety, there's the best practice for the methods, there's the actual data formats. And if people don't feel that they're involved in that process and understand why all of these things are being added, it just feels like it's almost time being taken away from their essential work. So I think it's very important to have, I think, as you said, like a framework exactly of why are we doing this and how is it going to benefit everybody.
Jens, you had a lot of great recommendations and considerations. Some of them I was like as you're brainstorming, I was adding to the notes. If I want to highlight one thing that for me it's like truly very important, you said about the value. So aggregating value to this data in terms of like explaining everyone, trying actually get people involved to see what is the importance, not just for this data to be in a global repository, but how it aggregates value in terms of other benefits locally, for instance, data analysis or having the information, because data, it may not reflect anything if in terms of decisions and things that if you want to manage ocean resources, or even if we want to do our research and understand better the marine ecosystems. So I totally agree with that. I think it's I don't know how you say that we have an expression in Portuguese that we say that is like ant work, because every little ant has go. So it's like every little fish in the ocean has to say something. What I feel is that we are still a very small community in terms of data. So we have a lot of great scientists that could be involved in this data discussions, because they have experience on data. They are actually data managers already. They just don't call themselves. But I feel it's a very small community. We are trying to include marine data discussions in almost every meeting that we have here in Brazil, especially the ones with the ocean decade. And so we're trying to open to different publics, and we always see that it's the one with the least people, because no one wants to talk about standards and things, because it seems very boring, but probably because it's not something that we haven't been so efficient still translating about the importance and showcasing that. But now I guess we have several showcases, at least OBPS is doing, like when you show the papers, for instance, for the scientific community, see how many papers have cited the data or how it helped us in our site. I think it's easier and then really getting into all the procedures. And also it's a very gender biased. Here we have a lot of women, but it tends, I feel like I'm with a bunch of guys all the time talking about data. I think it's wonderful. I have a lot of guy scientists and friends, but it's still hard. We need to bring a young generation, for instance, of STEAM ladies that need to join this and maybe have a different view, or at least a different way to teach the importance of that. And but what I would like to think as we are discussing and brainstorming is if we can think about those messages. So if we could put those messages within these documents, I know sometimes we feel like nobody's gonna read, but they are being built and the ideas come and we may go beyond the community. But it is small, and but I don't know, I think we have started. So the positive thing is that now people talk about data and they are planning. I'm curious to know if how is data management practices in terms of regulation and funding where you are. So I'm going to give an example. Brazil has put, I don't know how they did it, but our federal agency has put within the regulation of the LTERs that you are required to share your data in our national systems. And our national systems is built on GBIF. So luckily, at least it uses the most trusted language, Darwin Core from Marine Biodiversity now. And it doesn't mean everything is there. The programs are still adapting, but we see a movement of data that has been stuck for more than 10 years. So how it is in your countries? Would you like to share?
Yeah, I can give you the South African example. So we are government funded, and our mandate is to provide research infrastructure. So we fall under the Department of Science and Innovation, and conditions of our funding is that all of the data that's collected through these research infrastructures have to be freely available. So there is an issue because we have to show value for what we're doing. So although it is freely available, people have to still register on our sites so that we can track downloads and stuff like that to show impact of our data. But anything that we collect is freely available. And then on the data management plan, so we fall under the National Research Foundation that does all the funding of the bursaries for universities and stuff like that. And they're busy putting in a place at the moment now that any new projects have to have a data management plan attached to the initial proposal. So it's not implemented yet, but within the next year or two, you will not be able to do any research without a data management plan.
Thanks, Tim, for sharing that. Brazil has the same plan for some parts. And I'm curious to know, I'll open to the other countries to say, but Tim, do they provide extra funding for data management in the projects? Because here they didn't, so they were asking the same thing. They asked you two more things: outreach and data management with the same amount of money.
Yeah, no extra money.
Okay, I see Yiming.
Yes, I'm poor. I need money. Well, I feel like one of the issue is so for us, for example, all of this are funded by projects. So we have this project where, okay, the project proposal always said you need a data management plan. Yeah, so there's one section, there's some amount of money that goes to data management. But the issue that I have with that is once the project is over, the money is over, but the data management is not over. So there are some things, for example, we're using Darwin Core Archive. There are some certain data that could not be made fair enough. For example, you just put it in Zenodo so that anyone can download it, but it's not indexed by the system. But then it was not possible 10 years ago, but now it is possible. So I have a backlog of data, old data that I have to clean up and make those things fair, but this is not really funded. So that's the issue that I have. I saw some people nodding. Probably, Jans, you could agree. Or do you have the similar situation?
Does anyone have the solution for Ying, or maybe a strategy that could help her, or things that work at?
I think that this is a never increasing activity. I mean, this is a snowball effect that will, I mean, once you start working that path on data management, I don't see that shrinking, but just keeping expanding more and more, and the resources being proportionally less and less. At least my experience in different organizations has been always the same. I don't think there's a solution for that. Maybe I'm too pessimistic, sorry.
In my office, there are 18 filing cabinets filled with close to 100-year-old data that's still waiting to get even transferred into a digital format. A lot of it, we started it, but then the pandemic kind of shut down this whole physical transfer of paper records to scanning teams and stuff like that. But we got some done. And the great thing was actually that, ironically, because everybody was suddenly sitting at home, including people who used to work in laboratories and in the field, I actually got some of them to transcribe old research vessel logbooks, so that we got 50,000 new records in of sample deployments and stuff like that from the 1950s to the 1980s. That was a great opportunity by chance. But I think I've completely recognized that there's one thing about what you do from now moving forward, and then there's another one about the mountain of stuff very often behind us. I tend to take the approach that we need to try and improve what we do from now on first, because if we try to address everything behind us, there's a risk that by the time we've done that, the technology has already changed again and there's a new standard. And I think the other thing is, like, obviously it's very good that you've been working with Darwin Core. That's actually something we're still struggling with getting properly implemented, because we have a lot of legacy systems and there's a lot of work involved in transforming it all. But I think that's one of the key things, this whole project-based work nature we end up with, is that I call it kind of portal disease almost. Like, every project is going to develop the greatest portal you've ever seen to access data, and they invent their own standard very often as part of it, and then the funding dries up and the enthusiasm dries up, and there's another portal now sitting in a quiet corner of the internet, and then you move on to the next project where you're going to build the greatest portal that anybody has ever seen to access the data, and you're going to improve on that standard data. And then we have the really, really big ones like OBPS and GBIF, and within oceanography, well, there are standards. Within fisheries, there are big data centers and stuff like that provides an element of continuity. But there is something about being able to almost separate what are really important core standards that you should aim to try and build into any system, whether it is one of those greatest new systems that's project-based, or whether it's the more essential plumbing systems that you have when you manage data. Because trying to manage the data inside those responsive portals actually will not, in my opinion, provide long-term care and accessibility for data. You need sort of almost like an underlying archive function. And if somebody wants to go and extract a set of data from that and provide a new portal to provide a new way of looking at it or analyze it, that's great, that's fine. But that's almost a separate exercise. You need that infrastructure level almost where the basic things happen, like when did the data set come in? Is it transformed into the right format? Where does it live? Is it backed up? And all those tedious things that we've talked about as well. And that's the thing that can be very difficult to get funding for, I think.
Jens, thanks for sharing all these thoughts. One last thing that you said that we often don't comment, and maybe we can think about some recommendations about that, is in terms of infrastructure. I don't know how it is in other countries, and but the hardest part of acquiring funding in Brazil is for infrastructure. So even equipments or things like that, that may be not so permanent. So with the shortage of funding, we tend to prioritize, since we already have maybe a digital infrastructure that is going to help us do the work, we tend to buy less equipments and invest more in the operational part of what already exists. And this, I don't know, I think maybe this is not the good way to go in the long term, because you know, it has to have a balance, because we know those equipments have a life. So do you have any comments or suggestions? How do you guys, and I want to hear also from our other folks that if you want to add. Christian, I see you have a comment too here.
Yeah, no, I was just commenting on the chat. I don't think it's that relevant, but yeah, for this data rescue or metadata, like digitalizing logbooks and things like that, of course we try to use or to get a couple of summer interns every year that can do just a bit, year by year, a bit after a bit. But yeah, that's currently what we have. I know there are other programs for data archaeology and rescue.
I will ask, Julia, can you share the screen while we are talking? I was adding some sticks from our talks, and I will start populating also with Chris what said about archaeology. Yeah, people struggle here in archaeology in Brazil. There's very few researchers and the data is very hard to find. I don't have a lot of experience in museums, but we went on a cruise with many archaeologists last year, and they were telling all those stories. They were like, because they were telling all the data and the information. I said, where is this data? Because we don't know, like, where you access that. And they were like, oh, they are in, I don't know, 300-year books and things like that. And I said, okay, if you want that to, and we needed that information for to manage one of our sites, which has a lot of shipwrecks and things like that. And it's very hard to access. There's one other thing here. I'm curious to know if you recommend, in terms of still of infrastructure, do you recommend, when people ask you, do you recommend things, equipments or brands and things like that, or you prefer not to?
in terms of particular standards, always try to recommend the big ones, so to speak, like, you know, OBPS, GBIF, or whatever field you're in, trying to make sure you know what are the kind of global system standards, and at the very least ensure that when we're collecting data in an area that we're covering all the information that is needed for those standards, even if we don't end up with a system or data format that is 100% compliant right away. Because the other part of this can be, I'm sure others have similar challenges, but you know, I work inside government, for example. They have very strict regulations on which IT systems you can use and things like that. So actually, really, really simple things like making use of existing open source applications can be a challenge, simply because you can't run them inside the environment. But I think that's where cloud is helping, and can hopefully also help newer solutions, because you can almost start for free by running a small application in the cloud and try it out and experiment with it. And then as you add data, yes, there will probably be a cost as it grows, because you're using more storage and more processing. But you've been able to do that first look to understand and work with the system and sit down next to people and show them the screens. And I think that's very important sometimes, because that's how they see that their data fits in, and it gives them some benefit as well. So it kind of comes back to the culture of it. But having a fairly lightweight way of showing and telling early on in a process. If we get all fancy about it, you could call it agile development and stuff like that, because you're doing it in steps and then testing it with your users. But in reality, it's really just about, you know, try to get something up and running, ideally that's linked into standards early on, and then, yeah, talk to the people that are actually dealing with the data on a day-to-day basis through collection and so forth, and figure out how maybe to adjust so it works best for them when they're putting the data in, for example, or when they're needing to analyze data as well. And then behind the scenes, you almost deal with that standardization stuff that some of them will be interested in, and realistically some of them will also not be that interested in, if they're just keeping a very local focus.
Thanks, Jens. I was curious because I had to explain. So we were trying funding outside of, as I put here, outside of academia, to keep the data hubs. And since there's all this innovation and things like that, and I remember one of the funders, she asked me why I chose one brand, or like this, like why the computer was so expensive, and like instead of buying that computer, I would buy I don't know how many others. And then I remember explaining why, and giving all the reasons and things that, okay, there are options, but how long, and then the type of investments, and so it's, I think it's also see how much people want to do things, and they may want to support initiatives, but they don't know why we use that, and so they are not aware of the process and the internal things that require. So as much as we show and we try to explain in a simple way, it may be I think we may be able to really not convince in terms of pushing, but to explain the importance and aggregate value of that. And I thought it was very like people would understand, but no, they don't. They say, why are you want to buy, I don't know, a supercomputer or something like that. But at least we have the servers. That's something I didn't mention on the talk, but we should put here about this international shared infrastructure and the clouds. I think those are probably one of the greatest tools that we have right now. I'm gonna add here. I see some sticky notes around too. I guess you all have access to the board. So I see here, I see Lisa, I see Mabel, Yulia. Would you like to comment how is in your centers? What stage of data implementation you are, and what is the first best practice you are dealing with or you're trying to implement?
Hi, just again, I'm just an observer here. I'm not involved in this type of data management side. So I think I'll be able to contribute maybe more on Monday, the capacity building component of this. So I just wanted to, yeah, listen and find out more about the work you're doing.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for being here. Let's see who I have.
I can maybe share a few views that we have for the data management. So one thing I very recently find in my work is that people really want to share and manage their data, but they don't know how. And it's very hard for a scientist to understand how the data management system works, how the databases work, and how to use its database, especially because its database has different, let's say, guidelines and tutorials. So that's one thing that, let's say, delays this procedure. And then going back to the point by Yingming earlier that the project money, the project funding ends while the data management keeps going. Maybe this is more towards a solution, let's say, but I'm thinking if the data management was organized at the organization level and each organization would have a data management plan, specific plans and ideas, what to do with biodiversity data, what to do with chemical data, physical data, etc., then this would help a lot. It would remove the pressure from individual scientists, and then to support that, there would be a data management group in the organization that could support the scientists and support all the projects in this organization.
Jens, would you like to comment on Julia's? Or
yeah, it was
okay.
Something that's strong, because I completely agree that that's what we should do. But going back to the project funding level, or even the overall funding, I think several people have now said, yeah, there's no increase in funding when you have to do data management and outreach as part of it. It's the same funding, but you now have to do these other things. One of the challenges becomes that it can be seen as a competition for resource between the science side and the data management side. It's like, why do we need to spend money on data managers when we have all this essential science we also need to do? That's taking money away from what's important for the academic work or so forth. I think as data managers, we know that overall managing your data well adds value to the organization in terms of being able to reuse the data and recognizing that reuse value of it. But it kind of comes back to, I think, the early point about culture and buy-in, demonstrating that saving is really important, and it's something I think we don't maybe do a lot of sometimes. We talk a lot about how there's X number of millions of records available to you now, but it's about recognizing how much investment we have almost avoided having to do again. You don't need to send another survey out because this has already been covered somewhere else, for example, and that sort of saving or return of investment can be important if you want to try and implement more organized data management on a full organizational level, I think.
Does anyone want to build on these comments?
Yeah, I think that this point of view is very important, because you said it right, Jens. It's not about how many millions of observations we have. It's about what we can do with them. It's like maturity systems on your. So it's not important the grade that you have, but what you can or you cannot do with it. And there is probably where it relies a key message on why we spend 10% or 15% or whatever of the budgeting for specifically data management. That's something important to keep in mind. I agree, Jens.
I guess we all agree with that. In OBS, we were discussing. We had a very rich conversation about that and how the systems, for instance, can move from data repositories to actual data information systems, and how each of us, for instance, will start providing more, maybe some of them will provide also information products within their own systems and not just providing data to others to do that. And then we look at, for instance, at the case of NASA or NOAA that has all the data, and they also, or the European Space Agency, that they provide not just data, but also information. So you have all the reports and things on ocean conditions that people access that. So probably is how we move beyond as we aggregate more people. So we had the side of the conversation talking about how important is to keep the data flow and trust data, very high standard and good quality, but maybe also to aggregate more value and show the applications. Either we incorporate this information, or at least we showcase how it's this data has been applied to generate meaningful decisions and solve problems in society. And I think we are a lot behind on that, but everyone has the desire to do. Chris, would you like to comment?
I just wanted to actually comment on a possible message in the chat that was not. It was from Yiming about the. I think it's also another good key message on why we implement this interoperability, standardization, and invest a lot of time on that in under resource conditions, as she mentioned, is the peripheral countries or that are joining that community that can take care. So if you don't have enough resources, your colleagues from your surrounding neighbors can help you with that or provide this community support. And that caught my attention because I think it's also a good key message on why it is important to move into high standards or harmonization. I think the message was around, I don't know the line, but it's definitely on the chat.
I found here, I'm gonna also add, Jens, you have your hands raised.
I put in a note that just says make responsibilities for data management explicit. And that was sort of in the recognition that we are talking about under-resourced areas and programs here. So maybe it's not so likely that you actually have a full-time data manager. It's more that it's possible that it could be a person who does this as part of the job of what they're involved with broader. and it's just important to know exactly who does what, or maybe it's a shared task between multiple people. So the people who do things on the boat record all the sample positions and stuff like that, and then the analyst back in the lab or that identifies a plankton sample or something like that records that bit. But it's about what happens next, who does what, and who brings it together and looks after it. And unless that's actually clear to everybody, then people end up with little bits of spreadsheets in different areas, and it actually becomes very difficult to make good use of the data and get it into those standards.
Jean?
Yeah, I just want to chip in there on the standards. We have to be very careful with these under-resourced countries. So I can give you an example with Shirley's stuff yesterday. The standard says for the BRAFs, you need to have 1 kilogram of sardines for bait. Now, if we go, we're going to go up to Mozambique next month. The area they're going into Mozambique, you can't, that specific area, you can't get sardines at all. So how do you now keep up with these standards if there's simple things like that? And then to make it worse, she puts 6 BRAFs down for an hour, 4 times, so that's 24 kilograms of bait a day. She goes there for 10 days, 1/4 ton of sardines, if she could get them. And in Mozambique, that could feed a whole lot of people. Yeah. So how do you weigh up? The standard says I must do this, but there are other issues in these under-resourced countries that are actually more important. So we've kind of stuck in between these two at the moment, you know, keeping in mind the under-resourced stuff, but trying to keep the stand as close as possible to the standards as possible, because that's going to influence the quality of the data or the integrity of the data.
Tim, it's great that you brought this thought. Do you want to share, like, have you had a solution or things that you did that solved this issue, or how you are thinking about dealing with that balance of different importance of standards and things that we have to manage in science?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of experimentation now, because I don't want to be rude to our friends, but I think the people that came up with the BRAF standards are from the richer countries, and these issues don't come into play. So we're looking at, number one, finding alternatives for the bait. Number two, another issue that with the standards is that when you're sampling, the sites need to be 500 meters apart. Now, in our areas, that cuts out in Algoa Bay, it's one of the biggest bays in the south of Africa. It cuts out most of the reefs because they're never that big. So we're looking at coming up with alternate standards if we can prove that the results are the same. So shorter distances between the sites and less bait, hopefully. So Shirley's experimenting with using only 250 grams. And then the other one is on the analysis side. So she said it took, for the BRAFs, it was taking her about 4 hours for every hour of BRAF footage to analyze. We're playing around with using anywhere between only 15 and 20 minutes per deployment. But the problem is it takes a while to collect this data so that we can prove that, you know, the stuff is the same. So we're getting there, but we're not there at the moment. So things are in place, but yeah, it takes time to actually come out with these alternative standards, and then we have to show that, you know, you might have might not be as accurate as the proper standard, but it's still providing good results.
Thanks, Tim. So you're speaking about the first phase of data acquisition in the
Yeah.
field. I remember yesterday that Rui said, he made a comment on his presentation about this losing resolution and accuracy, maybe remember. And so I'm sure that, and you know, I've seen, and even when we are going to formulate protocols, for instance, that would cover larger regions. I remember we were doing the Rocky Shore protocol for Ambon, and still we couldn't reduce the number of like replicates, for instance. And we were all under-resourced countries. And now when I see you speaking about that, it reminds me about all the process and how we couldn't do it together, but we do in our daily routines, because if we cannot implement that best protocol, we're going to adapt and get as much data in the best and standards as we want. So I think it's a very important point that you said, and we're going to add those things here around, but thanks for sharing that. Christian, you have your hands raised.
No, I could not be more agree with Tim, and that his comments just made me think clearly on this issue, because it always also happens in the data management side. There are more fundamental problems sometimes in certain regions, like simply that they cannot guarantee electricity during the whole day, or internet access, which is the most what we'd say the most basic thing. And again, also that who is dedicated to what, because in certain regions you may have even people that have two jobs or another job apart from the one that they have in the institute to do other things. Or so, and then it comes to this balance on, all right, you want to apply international or world-class standards there, but the infrastructure is not ready, the resources are not ready. So, okay, then you need to bring expertise from richer countries, let's say, to do that. And then it starts this thin line in between this colonization or parachute science. And so then it comes these care principles, maybe very, very relevant there, because you need to ensure that the data sovereignty, it's still from the country that you are supporting. And then, yeah, again, the data policy issue, because then this data might be very relevant for a certain country. So it cannot be open access until this country really exploits the whole content of the data. And then it opens another spiral, because some of them may have no capability. So you end up with 30 years of data that it's not being open because still the owner cannot use it. So yeah, just I agree with Tim. There are more fundamental things when you want to apply these standards, and the solution probably it's not. Yeah, it's definitely not easy. I don't know if this was a quite chaotic reflection, but but yeah, I fully agree with that part. Maybe standards 100% cannot be adopted in terms of data management if there is no support from externals, which probably it brings up to the comment from Jimmy on neighbors that may have more capacity to support others.
Thanks, Chris. I'm gonna open for Lisa.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for all these really interesting discussions. I come from, Canada, and I worked for the federal government on monitoring programs, not for ocean, because I'm from Toronto, so very far from the ocean. And we're spoiled in Canada, where we have lots of resources and capacity to do this type of thing in every environment. And yeah, and I was just gonna follow, just building on top of Christian's point about countries that can offer a lot, like Canada or European countries. There is a fine balance to be maintained so that they don't steal things from other countries. But then I was also involved in projects with the UN in Canada, where we worked, for example, in the Caribbean. It was a North-South partnership where we worked with 8 different countries in the Caribbean, helping them increase their capacity to do coastal pollutants monitoring. So it really was, we had a partner university in Canada who we had as kind of like the experts from the North who were assisting the experts in the South. So, and then there was a very good relationship. And so I'm wondering here, is there any network for you guys where you can contact universities, build partnerships, relationships where they can help the under-resourced countries do the monitoring and, you know, maintain even after the project end or whatever? Like, because I think there's a lot of universities, say in Canada, that would be not happy, but might have the potential to support these countries. And I don't know if there's these networks in place through OBPS or whatever. I know it's not easy to build these things, but I'm just curious if there are any networks where, you know, like even me, when I did my master's on Nassau Grouper in Belize, and it was very hard for me to find a project to do my master's research on. I wanted to do the Caribbean, and I had no contacts, no network, nothing. So I just kind of was on my own. So if I'd maybe known about you guys, I would have said, oh, hey, Christian, I'm looking for a thesis research topic. You know, could you know, help me or point me in a direction where I could maybe find some projects to work on and help or whatever. So I don't know if these networks exist or not. Sorry.
Lisa, Christian said about IOD having this global network to be foster a place for this discussion and interconnection. We also highlighted MBON and GeoBON also having this work, but I don't know if Christian agrees with me. I still think it is in the beginning, so I can talk about the Americas. So it's like it has the movement, but I don't know, it has not just started, but because it has been going on for a long time. But I think now people have realized how important is collaborating for data sharing and management, and we are spending a lot of time on capacity building. We might get crazy in the end of this decade, but I think the effort is worth doing. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think I kind of agree, and I would put on top that yes, the network is there. It's been for a long time, but it is right that a lot of help is needed because IOD, for example, is a relatively poor organization. So, and there is this network of national oceanographic data centers. I guess there are now about 90, and another 42 associated data units. But there is problems with certain countries where the activity of these data centers, even though they are nominated, the activity is almost null. So any contribution to support or make emerge this network to a better stage for sure would, I am sure it would be very, very welcome. So I'm not sure if in this case Lisa have any particular thought on that, but IOD for sure would be very, very happy to.
But do you think? But do you think people?
Context,
yeah, but do you think people are aware of the network? Like generally, like I'd never heard of IOD before working with IOC. You know, so I don't know. Is it?
That's a good question, yeah, because OBPS, for example, is part of IOD, but I don't think it's perceived as an IOD project rather than a project itself, right? That's a good question. I'm not sure if Jens have a response on this, how this is perceived. Probably globally, maybe not as we would like to.
Yeah, and I guess there's no funding to, you know, have like, I don't know, newsletter, email lists where you just send to all the universities, say in Canada, you know, who deal with oceanography. Hey, do you know about this network, you know, or whatever? I don't know.
Maybe a campaign of
A campaign,
for
yeah,
research
communications campaign.
would be really useful. That I
Yeah.
think that's useful. Yeah.
I think it goes back to something Dana said quite early on, that actually in the grand scheme of things, this is quite a small community. And there will be definitely oceanographers in Canada that knows about the IODE, but it will almost be in a sort of very specialist area and probably not something that's very widely communicated outside of that specialist environment, whether that's because people are not interested or because that's, I can't answer that, but I do know of it through the nature of my work, but I also work very networked within the UK. We have like a marine environmental data and information network where all the data centers meet up and discuss things, which is very fortunate. And if we're honest about it, a reflection of having proportionally more resources than many other places. I actually thought about like going back to that under-resourced and support side of things. I think some of the things we see in these networks are brilliant, like the one in a box and stuff like that. There's access to a lot of tools, but I think it can be quite overwhelming if you're just running a small local monitoring program. I think trying to access a page like that and seeing hundreds of options, some of which require proprietary technology, some of which run open source, but is a very, very complicated path to get to install it all and understand how it works. If anything, I think better resource countries, the best thing they could do in terms of networking would be to supply people, even if it was for limited time. Literally send somebody to assist and explain and walk through some of this stuff and help people get set up, almost like a coaching or mentoring kind of program or something like that that could support that early start. Because otherwise it becomes a little bit random what Google showed first to you, if we're brutally honest. I mean, how do I manage my data? Google will throw something at you depending on what country you're in, what age group you are, all these kind of things. And it might sound crass, but it literally might be down to something like that, what solution people end up selecting sometimes, because they might not have time to spend months or years researching every possible solution. So I think some kind of coaching or mentoring from established marine data managers and stuff like that that can assist some of these early programs and projects in a way where there's no agency. So it's not like I have the solution because I developed this software package, but actually somebody who's a bit more neutral and say, well, there are different options. Which one will work best for you as well?
Yeah, I just want to make a plug for some of my colleagues. If you've got some time, watch the Coastal Observations for All recording. Part of that is the collab. Yeah, it was basically the whole idea is that we would create a box using low-tech sensors and ship it off to these countries who were interested in Africa. But included in that was sending people there to train them. And one thing that always gets forgotten about is maintenance. So part of the program as well is every year or every 2 years, whatever, to send people back again to do new training because people move on, and then also to maintain all of the equipment.
Ongoing, it's not a once-off.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have time, have a look at the Coastal Observations for All here.
I think that's what James was talking about.
I think, Tim, this is right. Maybe that's why those type of suggestions as like type of a coach program, or at least preparing the institution to have these connections between the trainings and things that could be replicated. I think training material in our own language is very important, and things that are that could be accessed later and wouldn't be lost. You know, when those companies like the big corporations, they have all these trainings that goes like, you know, I don't know how million people, and they are very efficient because they pass the basic information. And I think we are not in this step yet, but they could help us at least to like do the basic afterwards. Like, it's always great to have someone to implement, help you to do that. And I think this builds a lot of trust, and it may expand on collaboration, but it would be an equilibrium to have this material accessed. I'm sure all the systems are investing on capacity building efforts and materials, especially in the different languages than English. But it was very good that you raised about that on switching, maintaining the systems. How do you do in South Africa? How do you cope with people switching from different projects, or when the contracts they end? Do you have a solution?
Well, our organization is long term, so we employ people for the long term. But yeah, it is a problem. We deal with a lot of the universities, so those projects are short-term projects, and people come and people go. Part of the problem is that we lose a lot of data because people at the university have used our platform and they've generated the data, but before we even know about this, they've gone. So that is one of the issues we're trying to tackle now, so on how to know when our platforms and data is used, especially when it's not directed through us, like through a university or through some other institution. So yeah, it is a problem. But for us ourselves, we're improving our capacity as we go along. So our systems are kind of catered for.
Hi everybody, I'm Shirley, same surname. I've been in the other talks. I just want to actually follow up on Christian. And Tim said about the collab, but I actually want to throw this back at the data managers, actually, because there's nothing stopping them from having their own little box and actually putting that out there for under-resourced countries, where, because we're already putting expertise and help with the box, it's not just a box of things, it is going there and helping and teaching and training. It is very applicable to data managers as well, to go see how to help when we have a project, say in Mozambique or Tanzania. There's data being developed for the data managers to actually, and this is what will happen with SAON, is to follow up and have their own little sort of box where they go in and say, how can we secure the data? How can we save the data? What is the infrastructure that is currently there? Because there might not be constant internet or fiber or things like that. And data upload might be very slow. And there might be certain other things you need to think about how to do it. Work with a bigger institution in the country that has some of the resources, that almost deals like a data bank, where people can come in and can handle the data for them, so that it isn't always just on memory sticks and on external hard drives and all those things. So I think it's really important for us to also, for the data managers, to think outside the box and do these things and help their colleagues that doesn't have that expertise, and say, okay, here's a nice data management system. You have a choice of this and this and this. This is the infrastructure you need for each of them. This is how you use it. and in that way help them actually secure their data. Because in the end of the day, all the sampling you're doing, if you can't secure the data, it's pretty pointless to spend all the money. So yeah, that's my 5 cents.
Thanks, Shirley, for being again here and all those meetings. I know you are all so busy. One accident in Brazil, we had, I don't know if you heard, but one of our national museums, I think it was 2 years ago, it burned in Rio. So all the collections of the National Museum and the natural history, it just went away. And a big part of the marine collections also. And I was processing some of OB's data last year because I'm doing research also with that. And I came across many of the data that was from the museum. And then I showed them, you know, we still just have this data and it can turn on information because this is beyond that. Sure, we can have a fire on, I don't know, we don't want a fire in one of our systems, but the importance of having that and showing practical things like, see, an accident like that could, so, you know, I think maybe things that are more visual than all this data talk, sometimes we get very nerdy on that and we talk on vocabulary that people don't understand. And so I think it's an exercise. It's good that you mentioned that because it's an exercise to translate our messages in an appropriate way that maybe everyone can understand. It's like when you say about, I don't know, YouTube or I don't know, metaverse, and children understand that. So can we talk in this type of language? One thing that we have some like about 12-15 minutes, but I want us to maybe make an exercise to see if we are capturing the message. So everything that we talked, I think it applies a lot to biodiversity data because the school is struggling mostly with data implementation. But also if there are particularities on marine biodiversity data or coastal data that we should include in those best practices, challenges and strategies. For instance, there's a lot of value related to management of resources and people well-being related to our data. So maybe we could add that, and in the values, there are sensitive data, I don't know how to call that, but about endangered species and things like that, that they don't apply to other sets of ocean data. So do you have any comments on that? It's hard to break the subject, but just to put a little bit. Yiming?
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to add for the sensitive data, but it's another thing that I felt that it wasn't really mentioned is about the communication, because me as a data manager, sometimes I have scientists who come to me, hey, I have this data set that I need to publish because I need to publish my data paper, and I have to get this done in a few weeks or in 2 days, something like this. And then we got the data, but it's in like a Word document or something, because sometimes I don't know, our radar is not very wide, and also the scientists themselves are not very aware of what we are doing, and they're also not very aware of the data standards and things. So it's one of the challenges that I feel we have, and the solution, what we are trying to do better is to go to the expedition team. If we know the Belgians one, then we know, but the non-Belgians one, we are sometimes we miss. So if they ask us for help, for example, a Belgian team, they include us in the meeting for the expedition, then we could suggest how to manage the data. But still, I felt that it's the communication is a little lacking. Yeah, it's just a challenge that I find.
Thanks, Imi. I'm gonna allow Christian to comment on that. I'm sure all of us have comments on communication. No, Chris, you don't have your hands raised? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I had the hand raised, but it's not for responding to Yiming's comment.
Okay, so does anyone have any comments before we move to another topic about what Yiming said on communicating? I think it's totally important, and the ocean literacy community is not including data in their communication. And they are gonna kill me when they hear me saying that. I am on an ocean literacy event in Brazil. All the coordinators are here. And okay, they included one of the session because they think it's important, but it's not on the broad. So we need to take this message along, and maybe the showcases are a good strategy. The scientists kind of know the importance, but so yeah, so we have to, us data people have to circulate a little bit. Christian, can you say?
Okay, for this ocean literacy link to data, I can provide you an example from the Balearic Islands Coastal Observing System, where they are using real data from gliders to educate kids. I put the link now in the chat. But regarding the sensitivity of data, that was the previous question. For example, in Africa, there is a lot of data potentially available for biodiversity. That is included in fisheries data, but this data is very sensitive and it's not released. For example, in the EF Nansen program, we've been operating, the program has been operating for 40 years, collecting fisheries data regularly all around Africa. There is a huge database that when we have compared it with worms or ovis, there's a big difference, there's a big gap that this kind of data could fill. But since it's trapped in this fisheries data box, where it's sensitive information, there are huge problems here for plugging this or releasing this data. But this data is there. Yes, it's just that it's not appearing in the maps. But it's all around. More than 30 different countries own this data and their fisheries. But for that, I don't have the solution. We are trying these days to review the program data policy, for example, to open or release certain data to fit relevant infrastructures or program that may be useful for, let's say, human well-being programs like tsunami or operational systems that may save lives. But of course, biodiversity is another thing. And just to make that aware. But I don't have the solution for that. It was just a comment on this sensitivity. There is data available, but it might be under other umbrellas.
It's good that you mentioned, because so there are, I think those recommendations, it's important that we talk about this issue when recommending things. So, there are some strategies of data that you don't need. So OBPS, I think, has some recommendations on the fisheries group about not really putting the exact, for instance, latitude or longitude for some of the data, and sure that you are explicit is not the best way to work with the data, but at least it may be useful, and until people convince the fisheries to share their data. And also, I don't know, but in Brazil, we don't have a national, there is a national bank on fisheries, but it lacks in data like crazy. So we say that in Brazil, we don't have fishery data and statistics. And so we might have some uploads. I've seen some of the data going around, but it's still because the industry is not so developed, mostly rely on traditional and local fisheries. And so maybe I don't have a lot of information, but we're trying to think about a strategy so they can implement this data already connected to the systems, international systems, because there is a national one, but they're not so active, you know, it's kind of a mess. So I don't know how are in the other countries. I see a message here. Okay, the flow guider. Shirley, would you share? Do you want to share? How is it there?
Yes, again, fisheries data is fisheries data. They're not gonna freely make that available. It's difficult. I think we do have data around that they do publish. I'm not too familiar with it, but I do know we have issues with other groups as well that feel they are sensitive areas. That's because we might disclose a good area for where we found fish or high abundance, or where specific endangered species or rare species. But we in South Africa, although we have lots of rules and regulations, the policing is not very good. So a way of protecting some of the resources is to not make it available so that nobody can find it. It is what it is. So I do know that the discussion about basically altering the metadata on data sets is going around in some of our when we sit down for the annual biodiversity assessment and things like that, because yeah, all disclosure might actually not be good for the resource that is there, because it will get overfished, or people, because we don't have the infrastructure to police or make sure people don't do what they're not supposed to do. From our side at SAON, we have a policy, whatever data we collect, because we are funded by the government, but the main our main aim and goal is to make all the data freely available. So the only time the data, it might be under a embargo, as we call it, might be for a short period of time when there is a critical publication, or if it is connected with a doctorate research program where that specific data set is used. But that is very short periods of time in the overall periods. But generally, all the data that goes into the observation database that Tim deals with is, you can go to the internet, you can download it. So we are working towards it. I think there are many hurdles to cross to make it completely open data, because of all these other, it might be an effect of not having a resource in a different discipline like policing or law enforcement that stops certain departments or government entities not making data available just to protect certain sectors, if that makes sense.
Or as so we have lots of unemployed, impoverished people. One of the issues that have come up in our meetings is by publishing the locations of our instruments, they're going to get stolen.
Yeah,
so it's also the issue.
We have 40% of our population, 40% of our population is unemployed. So we have a lot of copper wire, everything gets stolen. We don't have street lights mostly because the wires are stolen. They are now putting in street lights that are solar, so there's no copper. So theft is a big thing. So if we publish exactly where a 200,000 Rand ADCP is in the ocean, it will disappear. So there's a bit of fudging with where exactly it is. You'll have to know, but yeah, we have to do that for instance, we have a big problem in installing now a surface continuous monitoring platform. We can do it, but we will do it only in MPAs to try and, because the policing is better in the MPA, but all our instrumentation currently in the sea is only indicated as it's a 10-meter subway. So nothing is visible on the surface. So that nobody knows where they are when you are at sea, because they'll pull them up. We've even had people pulling up the bruffs in the hour that we deployed them to take them out of the sea. So it's a difficult situation sometimes.
Shirley, I added this comment on the challenges in our note about ensuring security. Very good that you brought this issue. Does anyone want to comment on that? In Brazil, it is the same. Our unemployment is a little bit lower, probably 20%. They say less, but we think it's 20-25%. And but it's the same thing. We are about it's hard to say goodbye. We have 2 more days. We like talking about data. We have 2 more days on Monday and Tuesday. I really thank you for sticking with us here, and this is a very particular discussion about under-resourced regions, and it comes along in many of the meetings, but it needs to have a voice and maybe solutions, and hopefully we can find other colleagues in the future that could contribute on that. I think expanding the network and providing voice to the other ones that may not be here just because of the language, and we can help that with them. I think you are doing an amazing job everywhere you are. So I see you on Monday. I will leave the documents open, so if you remember something, and I will pass the reports later, so if you open everything now, you're not gonna see. I haven't been sleeping very well those days because of these meetings. And but I have to go around the ocean literacy people. They just talk about filmmaking, but we have to talk about data. It's good to see friends too. So I see you around maybe on Monday or Tuesday, and if not, keep in touch, and I will put your contacts and comments. Please share your emails and things if you want to join this community later. Bye-bye. Thanks, Julia, for helping me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.